started with this part. Yeah, so the topic today is climate change, and the ocean provides us with 80% of the oxygen we breathe. 3 billion people around the globe rely on the ocean for fish as their primary source of protein, and 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the ocean's coastline. Without a healthy ocean, we cannot thrive. So one of the biggest threats to a healthy, flourishing ocean is climate change. The ocean is becoming more acidic, polar ice is melting, sea level is rising, and the waters are warming. So the impacts of these threats on our environment are much more than we can begin to comprehend. Animals such as crabs and corals that form the foundation of strong marine ecosystems are struggling to build their shells. Shorelines are eroding and entire islands disappearing into the sea, leaving people behind as our first climate refugees. So solving these massive environmental challenges is going to require the collective action of many people, and will require innovation, creativity, and perseverance. So on this slide, this is not like particularly related to like climate change in specific, but there are a lot of also like acoustic pollution, which Dr. Valeria Vergara will talk about very soon. So this is more like human impact. Otherwise, the Arctic is also warming at more than double the global rate, where nearly 80,000 square kilometers of sea ice disappear annually, and the remaining ice is dramatically thinner. So as a result, vessel traffic is rapidly increasing. This brings real threats such as invasive species, black carbon on ice and snow, diminishing their heat reflective abilities, and increased underwater noise that interferes with local wildlife. So today we will have Dr. Valeria Vergara speaking to us. She's an experienced science communicator and has written multiple popular articles and research blogs and given numerous talks for diverse audiences. Her beluga work has been featured in various documentaries and magazines, including National Geographic, New Scientist, BBC Earth, and CBC Radio. So her research addresses the challenges such as a sound-centered species, the beluga, facing in this extremely noisy environment with all of these boats and motors. For example, her most recent study illustrated how anthropogenic noise affects the communication range of adult and newborn beluga contact calls in the St. Lawrence estuary, and showed that the masking of the quiet calls of the neonates by noise can impair mother-calf contact. So I will have Valeria speak more about this pretty much right now. And basically, I would like you to have your sound on for this if possible, because this is going to be like a lot of like sound in the presentation. So yeah.
Great. Thank you for that great introduction. Let me see first. Host, disable the screen sharing. Okay, so I think screen sharing needs to be enabled again. Let's see. Still not enabled.
Zihan, I think when I had to jump out to fix my audio, I made you host.
So nice to see so many faces. This is a great audience. Excited to be chatting with you about this.
Let's try if it works now. Are you able to screen share?
That should work.
Great.
All right. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Great.
Yes.
All right, so I'm super excited to be here today to tell you basically what I've been doing for the last 20 years of my life, which is very much related to this beautiful and charismatic species, the beluga whale. First, a little bit about our Wise's Whales Initiative. As many of you know, I'm sure, whales and dolphins and porpoises, which we collectively call cetaceans, are really ideal ocean sentinels of the health of our oceans. They're high on the food chain and they really depend on our ocean to live. So learning about them and about the challenges they face gives us insight into the health of our marine environment. And whales are very, very sensitive to a whole host of conservation threats, including climate change and chemical and noise pollution and plastic litter and ship strikes. And so what our Whales Initiative at OceanWise attempts to do is understand and mitigate whale-unfriendly human behaviors that contribute to these threats. So I spent the last nearly 2 decades of my life studying how these incredibly social, long-lived beings called beluga whales communicate, and why? Because communication is very, very related to one of the threats that I showed in the previous slide, which is underwater noise. So understanding how noise impacts whales is very much related to the study of cetacean communication. So what is noise? Basically, noise is a sound that we don't want. You have probably all experienced at one point or another unpleasant sounds. And we know there's very little doubt that noise pollution is a threat to our well-being and our health. We know that it interferes with concentration, with communication, that it has effects on our health. And we know this is the case for humans. Imagine for animals like cetaceans, like whales and dolphins and porpoises that rely on sound for every aspect of their life. And consider that water transmits sound much more efficiently than air. So the levels of underwater human-generated noise have increased tremendously in our oceans over the last 60 years from all sorts of sources. And to exacerbate this problem, the Arctic is melting. It really is. It is warming up at 2 to 3 times the rate as the rest of the planet. Younger sea ice in this graphic is shown in dark shades of blue, and the sea ice that is 5 years old or older is shown as white. So you can see that sea ice is not only shrinking in surface area, but it is becoming much younger and thinner. And so what happens? The ice cycles that are being experienced by Arctic marine mammals are changing, and they're bringing about increased access to areas that were, formerly pristine. And with this increased access comes noise. So how belugas use sound is a crucial aspect of their ecology that we need to understand to gain insight into the effects of an increasingly noisy ocean on the sound-centered species. So during the past 2 decades, we have learned a lot about how belugas use sound. And when I say a lot of this knowledge is concentrated on one single type of call, which is called the contact call. Why is this important? Because beluga whales use contact calls between mothers and calves, which is key, and for group cohesion. And these contact calls have been identified in a number of beluga populations around the world. They are very broadband, and for those of you that are not used to looking at spectrograms, I'll just go briefly over what a spectrogram is. We biologists need to look at sound to understand it because we're more visual than acoustic species. So when we're trying to understand sounds that animals produce, we decompose that sound into spectrograms, and you have on the x-axis time and on the y-axis frequency or the pitch of the sound. And when I say a sound is broadband, it means that it contains acoustic energy across a very broad band or wide band of frequency ranges. And so this is what this sounds like. So if you, I hope you heard that. Basically it sounds like a little creaking door, or when you open a door that is rusty, that's what it sounds like. So very, very different than all the chirps and whistles typical of beluga calls, which means they're very easy to identify and work with them. And they can be complex or simple, and those that are complex have a little overlapping whistle component that you probably didn't hear, but I'll play it again just in case. And just pay attention, to that kind of very low frequency whistle at the tail end. You could hear it. So those are the beluga contact calls. And there is a wonderful magical place on the north end of Somerset Island on the high Arctic called Cunningham Inlet, where I conducted my study for the better part of 2 summers, because it is a beluga nursery. What you're seeing is a video I took with my handheld camera, and those are just beluga mothers and calves that they spend 3 to 5 weeks of their time every year in this small nursery area. So it's an ideal place to study contact calls because these calls are used specifically between mothers and calves. And it's also a great place to study contact calls in the absence of noise. It's a very pristine area. So I'm not going to go over that particular study. I'm just going to ask you to trust me that it was a great study, and that the result of this study was that we found preliminary evidence that each beluga has its own individual contact call. So a contact call that the rest of the group can use to identify that beluga as her or him, like names a little bit, like acoustic name tags, which is fantastic. Now, if you move a little further south, you have the St. Lawrence Estuary beluga population, which is reproductively and geographically isolated from other beluga populations, and it is very endangered. And the population has around 900 individuals, and it hasn't recovered. Since 2008, there's been a tremendously high calf mortality and deaths of females associated with postpartum complications since 2010. And there are 3 main culprits: noise and disturbance, prey shortage, and this has to do with climate change, and contaminants. So we are with our partners and at Oceanwise, we're focusing on the noise component of this puzzle that we're trying to solve. In much of the Saguenay St. Lawrence Seaway, belugas are exposed to noise from recreational and from commercial vessels. And a lot of the animals that are exposed to noise are females and their calves. So it's important to understand the impacts of this noise on the ability of mothers and calves to stay together. Now, I'm going to play a beluga recording that I recorded myself all the way back in 2008 during a very, very quiet morning. This was around 6 in the morning before all boats and vessels started crowding the area. So listen carefully. I hope that you can hear how much like sea canaries they sound. This is why they have a nickname, sea canaries. And next, it was around 10 in the morning that same day. We were following the same group of belugas, but it became a lot busier with ecotourism boats and cargo ships. And I'm going to play what that sounded like underwater. So you could probably still hear the belugas in the background, but man, does it ever get complicated for belugas to hear one another in that kind of noise. And this again has to do with the fact that noise transmits so well underwater. So one of the, that was a really perfect illustration of acoustic masking. It's one of the most important impacts of vessel noise. Is communication masking. And what this means is reducing the range at which a sound that a beluga makes can be heard by another beluga. And communication masking can impact all sorts of things. You know, it can have impacts on the way groups stay together. It can impact echolocation or the ability to find food, the ability to navigate. But the consequences are particularly critical in the case of the vocalizations that mothers and calves use to stay together. So how do you study the reduction in communication space of a signal by noise? And this is where this talk gets a little bit technical, and I hope that I don't lose you here. So I won't get too technical. I'll go briefly over the details that I think you need to know to understand what the process was to get to where we got to. So there are a number of very important pieces of information that we need to understand to figure out the loss of communication space. We need to know the source level of the signal. That's the bottom little round circle. Source level basically is how loud. We need to know how sound is transmitted between the animal that makes the sound and the receiver. We need to know something about what the signal looks like. Is it a contact call? Is it a whistle? We need to take measurements of the noise in the area with specialized hydrophones. We need to understand the hearing capabilities of the animal. And we need to understand something that it's called the critical bandwidth of the auditory filter, which basically in a nutshell is how the cochlea in the inner ear decomposes sound. So all of these pieces of information take a while to collect. So it's a study that took us 3 years of our lives. And we conducted it in this beautiful place that's also a beluga nursery that is called Baie Sainte Marguerite, where it's a very well-used area or high residency area for beluga mothers and their calves. It's 20 kilometers up the Saguenay River from the mouth of the St. Lawrence. And we erected this little scaffolding tower that we called our research tower for the better part of 2 summers. And so we gathered information from this 6-meter high tower. This was our team there. On the number and type of boats, on the distance from the hydrophones, the distance of the boats to the belugas, and on the number of belugas approaching. And of course, we recorded the belugas, if you can listen, while we filmed them with a drone. That's a contact call. So the sounds that sound like a chainsaw of sorts, those are all contact calls, mother-calf contact calls. So I thought it would be important to illustrate how we collected our information. It was a great pairing of technologies of underwater acoustics and visuals at the same time. So as I mentioned, we had to also take into account beluga hearing. And so a little bit about frequency. You measure frequency in cycles per second, basically, or hertz, and that's analogous to human pitch. So belugas, like other mammals, have a U-shaped audiogram, and their hearing range is from 1 to 150 kilohertz. That is an incredible hearing sensitivity. The human hearing range, again, when we talk about hertz or cycles or pitch, goes until all the way to 20 kilohertz only. So compare 20 kilohertz to 150 kilohertz for belugas. They are incredibly sensitive in terms of their hearing capacity. So what we did to understand, so we know how how sensitive to sound belugas are, and we also wanted to know how loud their contact calls are. So we attached these D tags. They're not very intrusive. They have little suction cups on 22 belugas, and we analyzed 93 hours of recording. So each D tag attaches to a beluga for a couple of hours and then falls off on its own, and you pick it up and you have a recording of the sounds that that beluga produced. So we went through all these recordings and we extracted all the contact call series, and we made sure that we verified which series belonged to which beluga whale. And we did this through a method called angle of arrival, which looks at the difference in arrival time between the two little hydrophones in the tag. And we ended up identifying 53 contact calls attributed to 4 individuals. And that's the data set that we use to estimate loudness or source level. And we also used a data set from a mother calf pair at an aquarium called Oceanographique, because we wanted to know how loudly little newborn calves vocalize. So that's very important too. And so basically, this whole procedure was to understand how loud contact calls are. And in a nutshell, what you need to know is that the source levels or the loudness of adult beluga contact calls are very much in line with the sounds that other whales produce. So they're normal, but newborn calves pretty much whisper. They make very, very low, quiet sounds. And so these sounds risk being masked by boat noise a lot more. And if, you know, in a spectrogram, again, you can see that the middle sounds, the middle 2 or 3 bars, are those produced by a newborn calf, and they're much lighter, which means there's a lot less acoustic energy. And so this is a representative call decomposed into all the frequency bands. And all you need to know here, really, without trying to understand all aspects of the graph, is that you see, you know, the no boats versus boats. In the absence of boat noise, most frequency bands between 1 and 10 kilohertz will be heard by a conspecific all the way to about 4 kilometers or so. So quite a long range. But in the presence of boats, this range is reduced a lot. So again, the bottom, the x-axis is distance, and look how much the distance is reduced at all frequencies. And for newborn calls, the same thing is true. In the presence of boats, calls can be heard to a lot less extent than in the absence of boats. But the problem is that newborn calves start with a much quieter call. And so with no boats, newborn calls are heard up to about 300 to 400 meters rather than 4 kilometers. So imagine when you put a boat there, you know, within 70 meters or so, 100 meters, a little more than 100 meters if they're lucky, the mom basically will stop hearing the newborn calf, and that is a problem. This is basically tells us the same thing, but it's a model that we run hundreds and hundreds of times. Basically, we run every single call produced by a mom or a calf by every single minute of noise that we recorded in that nursery area, to create a model of all the possibilities that we would encounter. And that told us that the median communication range of an adult was around 3 kilometers, it says here, versus on boats just a few hundred meters, and the same for the calves. So the maximum ranges, what you need to know here is the maximum ranges are 18 times larger for adults than for calves. And this has tremendous implications in terms of the ability of mothers and calves to stay in touch in the face of human disturbances. And it means that underwater noise may be just one of the various causes of calf mortality in the St. Lawrence. So this study told us a lot about noise. And of course, we always want to know, what can we do about problems like this? Because this was just focused on the St. Lawrence with data that we had from that area, but it is happening in the Arctic at a very rapid rate. The Arctic is melting, boats are coming in, human activities are happening. It is happening all over the world, and not just with beluga calves, but with all sorts of cetacean species that are very sensitive to noise. So there are solutions. The beauty about issues of underwater noise is that when you turn the noise down, the problem stops. So you can implement ship quieting technologies. You can clean the hull of the boats and clean the propeller and retrofit boats in a way that the noise will be reduced by 60% or so. We can set aside quiet sanctuaries or no-go zones for boats, marine protected areas where boats and other forms of human activity are not allowed. That's super important. And we can slow down. Slowing down any kind of boat tremendously reduces the noise footprint of that boat. So there are solutions, which is the hopeful aspect of this. And at OceanWise, there are a number of things that we're doing to target this issue. We're doing research to understand the effects of noise and to improve methods to monitor beluga populations. So, for example, this research that I shared with you about mothers and calves help us inform policies that will protect these mothers and calves in their habitat. We're doing monitoring, so in key areas of the St. Lawrence Estuary, the Arctic, and the BC coast. We provide science-based advice that is based on to put in place basically policies and best management practices that are based on solid research. And we educate. One of the ways in which we do this is through articles such as the new Ocean Watch report on noise that you can access online to look at many of these things in more depth. And with that, I will open the ground for questions. Looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation. That was really great. There's so many questions in the chat.
Oh,
so let's see. The first one is from Jamie. How does noise pollution affect the whales' navigation and communication through echolocation? Change the biodiversity, weakening, impacting climate change. Maybe Jamie, you can unmute and ask actually directly.
Let me make sure I stopped sharing my screen. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. Yeah.
So Jamie, did you want to unmute?
So I know how with echolocation also affects navigation as well.
Yeah.
But how is it that the shift of marine life there in the Arctic Sea?
Yeah, so that's a really, really great question, Jamie. And echolocation essentially is sound. If I'm a whale and I want to navigate and I want to find my space, I don't do it through sight, especially if I live in the Arctic, where for 6 months of the year, there's no sun. You know, the sun is hidden. So you're navigating through dark waters. And so what you do is you send clicks. They're called echolocation clicks that bounce against the objects and come back to you. You hear those clicks and you know where to go. The same for food. I will send clicks out to a fish, get the clicks back, hear them, and know exactly where that fish is, how big that fish is, and how quickly I can get to it. Imagine that at the same time, there is a large cargo ship or passenger ship passing by, emitting or radiating very loud noise, essentially. That noise will mask the echolocation clicks that I will get back from the land or from the fish. I won't be able to hear the clicks back. So I can either get lost or not find my food. And both those things are pretty dire for a whale. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great. So our next question is from Ronan. Do you want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, I just asked a question. How do contact calls for humpback and North Atlantic right whales, how are they similar or different to beluga whales? And
Oh, that's a great question.
there's
And
plans in New York City for offshore wind farm projects, building
yeah,
the turbines, and I was wondering how they would impact the whale with echolocation and stuff like that.
right. So a couple of things here. Baleen whales, which are humpback whales, blue whales, for example, gray whales, North Atlantic right whales that have those baleens to filter their food, they don't echolocate. So noise wouldn't be affecting their echolocation because they don't use sonar. However, noise from large ships is much more potent at lower frequencies. And all the whales that I mentioned, baleen whales, basically produce use lower frequency sounds much more so than toothed whales, than something like a beluga or an orca. So they're much more affected by the noise radiated from ships or from wind farms as well. In terms of how contact calls are affected, there are some studies of contact calls in other species, but right now I don't have them in mind, so I can't describe what those sounds are. I do now know that humpback whales, for instance, have a kind of call between mother and calf that also becomes very quiet for calves, just as for beluga whales. I think that what differs between belugas and other whales is that the beluga contact call is very, very broadband, and that is unusual. And that probably has to do with the fact that they evolved in the Arctic and they needed to develop or evolve these very broadband contact calls to filter through the icy chunks, the icy environment. That was a little long-winded answer. I hope it helped.
Yeah, that's great. Good to know that it's very important for belugas and I guess not important for other whales, but a little bit less important.
Yeah, no, it's important for all whales, absolutely. Yeah. It's just some whales don't ecolocate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then from Sarah and Ronan, how do you measure the hearing range of a beluga whale? Like, how did you know that was
so how you measure hearing sensitivity would be, which is the graph that I showed, in two possible ways. You can have behavioral thresholds. So you do this only with captive whales, and you play a sound and ask the whale to press a paddle if they could hear the sound. And you do it through a thing which at this time I don't remember the name of the technique, but it's basically measuring responses in the brain. So there's nothing the whale has to do behaviorally. And this is what you can do with whales that, for example, get temporarily stranded, which has been done in some areas, or whales that you circle in a net temporarily and then you let go. Those whales are not going to be able to participate willingly in behavioral experiments. They're not trained to do that, but you can then position these suction cups and play a sound to these whales and measure their brain stem responses to that sound and know which sounds are heard and which sounds are not heard by the whale.
Wow, that's incredible. Thanks. So many questions. From Faye or Phi. Okay, what is the impact of noise underwater on the beluga whales? I feel like you answered some of that in your presentation. And what what news does your research bring to conservation practices?
Yeah, I think that was answered in my presentation. What's the impact of noise? Well, I studied specifically masking of their communication signals, and I picked the most important signal, which is that signal that maintains contact between mothers and their very dependent and fragile newborn calves. A calf that cannot be in touch with beluga mom is a lost calf. They can't survive alone. And so noise interferes with the ability of moms and calves to stay in touch effectively. And in terms of conservation practices, then this makes it so that distances are put in place so that, there's, for example, the new regulation that boats cannot approach belugas to any closer than 400 meters. Same for killer whales out here on the West Coast. There are sanctuaries that are set aside, a host of various different solutions that can be put in place once we have the science available.
Awesome. Yeah, so then I think there's one question that I thought was pretty cool. Have you monitored any recent changes that local vessels have made towards protection of the whales? Like, I guess, like after
Yeah,
your work has been published.
That's a really great question. And yeah, we have just in one area that is Bay Sainte Marguerite, that's where we had a research tower that I showed you on the picture and the video. That area, the first year we were there, was not closed off to boats. The second year we were there, in 2018, it was closed off to vessels. So we compared the noise in the area from year 1 to year 2. What we discovered, unfortunately, is that closing off the area to boats didn't work in terms of noise. It worked in terms of disturbance. The belugas were a lot less disturbed. Why didn't it work in terms of noise? Because boats still had to get through, and they were allowed to go through on the other shore. This was a river we're talking about, and this area of the river was closed off and boats were allowed to pass on the other shore. What happened? The other shore is only 2 kilometers away from the area that was closed off, and sound travels very, very well in water. So the difference was negligible. The boats that were having to go in convoy along the other shore still radiated noise that affected the nursery. So this tells us a lot about where to position protected areas that are sanctuaries. If you want these sanctuaries to be effective in terms of noise, you have to create a much bigger buffer zone around the sanctuary for them to work.
Amazing, thanks. So we will have one last question before, there's many questions in the chat. But yeah, let me know, Valeria, if you're comfortable like sharing your email. Otherwise, we can like continue the discussion in the Whova community board. So I think, okay, Edge asked, can you tell us about changes in the species behavior, either in like feeding or like other biology due to noise, like specifically through anthropogenic activities?
Yeah, you guys are asking great questions, and that is such a tricky one to answer, because when belugas are used to coming to feed in an area, if you introduce noise into that area, sometimes the animals don't have a choice. And so if you're expecting that the animals will leave the area, if you're expecting really big behavioral responses, you might not see them visually. And so people might have a tendency to say, or they may be tempted to say, well, the whales are not leaving, so they must not be disturbed. The whales not leaving doesn't mean they're not disturbed. It just means that if your food is in the kitchen and you have a fire truck coming to your kitchen, you're going to need to stay in your kitchen to eat. So behaviorally, you're not going to observe something that is very, very evident. However, you can infer subtle behaviors, and you can do that, for example, acoustically. So one of the things we notice often, I wish I had an example here. I didn't prepare one, but when we have hydrophones in the water and all of a sudden a cargo ship passes by, radiating the whole area with insonifying the whole area with noise, the belugas stop talking. So you hear this beluga chatter and then silence. And then there's silence for a good minute until the noise is gone. And then immediately, as soon as they can, the belugas start conversing again, which is very much as if you're walking with, with your friend down the road and you're having an important conversation and an ambulance passes by. As soon as the ambulance siren is really near, you stop the conversation, you wait, and then you resume it. Another thing that we noticed acoustically is that whales repeat what they say, or that they become louder. They scream at each other to be heard. And all of these things are solutions for belugas, these are called vocal compensation strategies in biology. That's what people call these things, but they take a lot of energy and they make the communication processes of these animals much more ineffective. So there are signals that something is not okay when you discover that a species is engaging in vocal compensation strategies. They're indicators that there's noise around. Another long-winded answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, so then I will, if Dabney, you can put in the chat the Whova community board, we can ask there as well. So thank you so much for this presentation.
No problem. I'm
amazing.
happy to be here, and feel free to pass along my email. Happy to answer any questions that may come at a later time.
Great. Yeah, so then I guess now we will have a 10-minute break and then we will do a reflection activity. So thanks so much, Valeria.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. All right, see you at 3:13, or well, wherever you are in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Dabney, if you could start us off with the reflection and share back.
Yes, I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to join. And then, we will have a short 15-minute breakout reflection activity. And then we'll come back and share and then have another presentation. So this next breakout room reflection activity is on COVID-19. So the question, I will paste it in the chat, and then if you can copy it and then take it into the room when you go, that would be great. And then I'll also try to broadcast it as well. So the question is, COVID-19 transportation changes have created a quieter surface world as well as a quieter marine environment. What can we learn from these changes in regards to travel and tourism, shipping and industry? And how is climate change impacting your community? And how can we adapt or build resilience to these changes? So lots of good questions. I have a feeling that, let's see. Can I specify what is meant by transportation? I think you can interpret that how you want. Like if you want to talk about shipping and how shipping has been impacted in the past year and a half. Also air travel, I think as well would be a good interpretation of that. let's see.
Yeah, it
Here
can
it is
be
in the chat.
many things. Like it could also be like people not taking public transit as much. Oh,
Ocean, more general, kind of whatever. I think you can take it and wherever you would like to go in whichever direction. Ocean travel, sea travel, or really anything. Any other questions about the breakout room? And then you can also run with the last two questions as well, which are also very big. How has climate change impacted your community, and how can we adapt or build resilience to these changes? Alrighty, so this will be about, let's see, 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes in the room, 5 minutes back here. Let's see. Zihan, I no longer have host abilities, I don't think, so if you could put them in their breakout rooms. All right, thank you. Yeah, that is kind of the question maybe of the Global Youth Summit is how can we make an impact and how can we spread awareness? So maybe we can share responses to that in the chat or in the community space as well. I see that Graham commented if anyone from his breakout room would like to share. If not, we can also move on into the next part of the session. Oh, there are 2 hands raised. All right, Graham, if you would like to unmute, that would be great.
Yeah, I just figured I'd ask in the chat if there was anyone else from my breakout room. I didn't want to steal the opportunity from anyone in case they were hoping for it, but I'll just quickly talk. What we talked about, we basically, just to summarize, we said that with transportation of goods and services and that kind of thing, if it were decreased by COVID-19, I was just saying maybe it would be good if we continued to have a system of transportation of goods that was more similar to that during the pandemic than after, because we've been able to survive, and I don't think there've been any global shortages of any, well, no major global shortages of anything. And so that may decrease the amount of carbon emissions released into the atmosphere and just have less of an environmental impact. We also said that with adapting to climate change, my region hasn't been impacted very significantly yet, but in the future it may be. So that's exactly why, like going into the next question, that a resilient and an adaptable government with adaptable and resilient infrastructure will likely be critical to mitigating the effects of climate change, especially in regions that are going to be experiencing large-scale environmental events that are going to be exacerbated by climate change, such as hurricanes or flooding or forest fires or any kind of thing like that. Other events, droughts, major weather events, and especially, actually, we had in our breakout room, we had 2 people, including me, that are from the Canadian prairies. So our economy is really founded in large part on agriculture. And as weather becomes more unpredictable on a yearly basis due to climate change, that may jeopardize the growing season and make the production of crops more difficult or more unpredictable. So yeah, in the future and right now, to mitigate climate change, just continue to advocate for lowering carbon emissions and also advocating for a resilient society.
Great, thank you so much for sharing all extremely important points. Would anyone else like to share? If not, then we can get moving into the next section of the session.
So I can share very quickly what we talked about because it was quite different to what we heard from the other people. yeah, we basically, we weren't much aware of how the shipping industry was influenced by COVID-19, but we raised a few points by more people taking or driving with their own cars instead of taking public transport, just because it's scary to be with so many other people in the same space. And also there was much less air travel now during COVID pandemic, and we're kind of excited to see how, you know, if there will be a boom and everybody who was just couldn't wait to travel will travel again, how flights, if they will get more expensive, if they will get to the same point as earlier. And one of our group members mentioned how flying right now is, that you get like, you're almost in an empty airplane, and there's like a huge distance between people so you can eat, and it's quite not so good. And one thing I found very interesting was also maybe Sarah can correct me if I say something wrong about the fast deliveries, because people order more online shopping and they go for fast deliveries, which will arrive after 1 or 2 days, which lead to basically more flights or shipments with less packaging or less goods moving around. So that might be a negative effect of COVID, which might be a new trend. So that should maybe be something, a point that needs to be tackled. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to apologize again for the short time that we had to talk about all of these things. And just invite everyone to again continue the conversation in the chat if you feel like you would like to share some more about your thoughts. So our next presentation is from one of OceanWise's Ocean Bridge alum, Shiteng Roy. So I will just introduce him, and then he will have a presentation and a Q&A session. So Shiteng Shu has a background in community development and served as an Ocean Bridge ambassador in the 2020 cohort, where he co-founded the Oath Project, which we will put a link in the chat, and which is an environmental nonprofit that encourages folks to #take the oath and do one act at a time to help the earth. Since it started, the project has gone on to run many initiatives, including a campaign to pick up one piece of litter each day, a global cleanup that reached 12 worldwide locations, and the Climate Change Makers Challenge, a hackathon that brought together 130 youth from 15 countries and 5 continents in a 48-hour event to create innovative solutions to climate change. Having been on founding teams of 4 nonprofits and 2 social enterprises that have collectively reached 8,000 people, Shiteng Shu is a big believer that amazing things happen when people come together for a common cause, like this conference. So with that, Shiteng Shu, take it away.
And thank you. Say thank you again to everyone, in particular the Oceans, for inviting, and to all of you folks for listening, to all the incredible guests we've had. And if I can be honest with you, as I was preparing for today, I was feeling a whole bunch of imposter syndrome, in the sense that, if I can be perfectly honest with you, I probably even like reflecting on the incredible youth that we have just in the calls and just chatting with some of you folks over the last couple of days. You know, it is so inspiring to hear about the incredible work that all of you are doing. So thank you for that. And truthfully, I'm not someone who's necessarily in the environmental field per se. That's not my professional thing. My kind of own background is I've been fortunate to be on the founding, as a founding board member, a co-founder on a couple different social enterprises, a few different nonprofits, most of them in the kind of sport for development space. And I'm a big believer in the power of sport, physical activity as well. And I think the Oath Project is kind of a newer kind of initiative that I took on. However, I think across all my work, I think a question which I've always been fascinated about, and this is kind of maybe more from a community development side, where maybe fundamentally, I think I've, specialized in a little bit, is this question, what kind of cool things do you happen when you bring a bunch of people together for a common cause? And I reflect here, like even the IUCN conference that we have right now, like we've got all these people, thousands of youth, who've come for this conference all across the world over so many days. And what's going to happen out of all this, right? What kind of, collaborations do we see? What kind of, ideas pop up? What kind of learnings do we get? And that's really one of the things that fascinated me about the IUCN conference, but also about Ocean Bridge. When I first heard about it, it was just, I was learning about, here's this initiative, which is bringing all these youth together, these 160 plus youth from all across Canada, giving them a platform to develop their skills. And I knew, especially on the environmental side, I needed a lot of skill development to figure out, how I can make an impact and really give them a platform. And so I was really fascinated by this, especially in the context that, I'm reflecting, especially you think of like the momentum that we were having with the Friday for Futures events and so much like important conversations about climate change, especially, right before COVID. And there was so much momentum. That's kind of when I applied, because it's like, these are questions where I felt like, I wasn't doing my part. I wasn't doing enough. I'm like specializing in all these other important issues, but here's the reality is we don't have an Earth. We can't talk about sport. We can't talk about business. We can't talk about all these other things I might, be doing for my professional life. And so that's something that really popped up to me. I'm also a Bengali Canadian. And so, it's cool hearing from the folks from Pakistan. So, Pakistan is the second most impacted country in South Asia. Bangladesh is the first most impacted country. And the reality is we are going to have 30 million climate refugees in my lifetime, or by the end of the century. And I think a real serious question, that's one of the questions which Dabney posed in the beginning, serious question is, what are we going to do with them? And I think it's like, I was seeing in Bangladesh, like the real life impact of, people literally moving away, our coastline literally going a couple meters less every year. And it was really making an impact. I'm also a Bengali Canadian. And so from the Canadian side, I'm presenting from Halifax, Nova sea levels. I graduated from Fredericton and specifically the University. And this is not the ocean, but they had rare flooding. They always have annual flooding to some extent. They had record flooding in 2018. They had near record flooding in 2019. And when people ask, why it was climate change. And it's interesting because like I'm just reflecting on these pictures right now. I'm showing you like sea level rise, and that's like one small impact of climate change. You think about how is climate change going to affect those whale populations? How is climate change going to affect coral reefs? How is climate change going to affect so many different complex issues, beyond, the things, like a simple thing like sea level rise. And so that's maybe where, I was really interested in the question of like, okay, let's innovate. Let's try to figure out what can I do here? And so on one branch, I was like getting into Ocean Bridge, and that was really cool, really honored to have been selected as one of the folks there. I was also getting into this other kind of world on the side, which is kind of this world of hackathons. So that's kind of interesting kind of word and concept. Zihan shared a little bit about, what it was, but essentially, what these hackathons are, they're kind of like these marathon events where you are literally spending 24 to 48 hours, often together. In pre-COVID, we would obviously come together, and and sometimes literally sleeping during the events of whatever you're getting hosted, some is university, and you're like working on some kind of idea. Oftentimes you're talking to real people, you're trying to figure out what are the actual problems that people face. Where are you actually like doing some real research? And so it's not just like you come up with something, it's like how many people have you talked to actually validate that whatever idea you're talking about or whatever problem you're trying to address is actually your problem. There are these events where you then brainstormed, you found these really important, you found these teams, and this is I think one of the most central important parts of hackathons is you met these cool people, oftentimes strangers, who maybe were worked with you because they were attracted to your idea, or maybe it's because you were attracted to their idea. But then it's kind of interesting to see how you can meet all these people who are wanting to work on similar things. Word hack often comes from code. And so the hackathon tradition was something which kind of was initially kind of more a software development, computer science kind of thing. It's kind of interesting that, more recently hackathons have kind of expanded to a whole bunch of things, hardware stuff. I'm going to share with you some of the things that climate change riggers came up with. There's a whole whack of stuff that people can come up with. And so, it's kind of nice to get prizes and stuff. But the whole point being that, these are these hackathons where they're all about sparking ideas. So there are kind of these two branches that are happening. So one is I was in Ocean Bridge, really want to like work on some idea that's gonna, make a difference in the environment, even though I wasn't 100% sure exactly what that would be. Now, also like I'm getting into hackathons kind of for similar reasons to, where, I want to figure out, how can I make a difference? I just graduated university. How can I actually make a difference in the world and scale my impact beyond whatever I've already done? And this is what brought us into the project. We started a hackathon. I'm going to go into a little bit of that in a bit. And at this hackathon in May, and last year, we wanted to envision a community where, we encourage people to take the oath and, and create a community where people believe in the power of individual actions. The idea that 1 + 1 + 1, if you add it a whole bunch of times, is equal to infinity. The idea that small acts do matter. The idea that we all need to be part of the solution. It's not like no one can just say, oh, you know what, climate change is someone else's problem, government deal with it, or corporations deal with it. It's like everyone needs to deal with it, right? And we need to be a part of the solution. And, and it's an acronym, really fundamentally about doing one act at a time to help the earth. It's going to take lots of little steps. And this is a fundamental belief. I don't think there's a magic bullet to climate change. I think there's a lot of small little things that need to happen to make it, and big things as well, need to happen to make, a real impact to this generational problem. And kind of reflecting on the hackathon, I entered Hack the Earth in May 2020, and it's like our first submission. It's kind of cool reflecting back, at kind of what it all started it with. And what's kind of cool is soon after that, we built this really amazing team, across, I think we worked from like 11 times or something crazy. So it was kind of cool, a couple of those were from hackathons. There was a couple of people from Ocean Bridge specifically, so again, all these different branches coming together, a couple folks just from our own network. And so it's really kind of cool. It's like building a team and be like, okay, you know what? The Oath Project initially started as kind of the social media campaign driven by this hashtag. We're encouraging people to do these singular acts like picking up one piece of litter a day. And I didn't really have too much social media experience. How do I get that on board? How do you get the fact I don't have scientific experience on board? So it's really cool to build this team with complementary skill sets on this common mission. Launch our website on June 8th for World Ocean Day. Start with the Trash Be Gone pledge of, picking up at least one piece of litter a day, and often more. It always ends up being more. You pick up one, you see one next to it, it becomes like a thing. But I think that the idea of, like making those intentional decisions to like do something every day, even if it's, I do something regular every day. We had this cleanup challenge, which was really cool. And, I had a dozen cleanups in a whole bunch of locations. And then, of course, we have our this Climate Change Makers Challenge, which was really cool.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Okay, this is awesome.
I'm such a fast talker, so I will slow down. Thank you for noting that.
No
okay.
worries.
So I guess talking about specifically like the Climate Change Makers Challenge, I think what's kind of interesting is oftentimes what gets highlighted, and this is the stuff that people like to share in the big high level things, is the fact that we did reach a lot of people. It kind of blew up. We spend maybe, like, obviously there's a lot of planning beforehand, but we announced it maybe 3 or 4 weeks. We were really behind. We weren't sure if initially we were hoping to get like 50 people. It turned out to be 130 plus youth. It was kind of cool. We had a group of 10-year-olds from Florida who were participating. It's also cool to get a whole bunch of mentors. I think we had 28 mentors, judges, folks like that, So it's like this group of people really from all across different ages, not just youth, came together to help with this problem. 15 countries represented, 5 continents, that was pretty cool. And people from all different kind of skill sets. So really, you had engineers, business people, developers, environmental science people, all coming together with this common passion of what do we do about this climate change crisis, especially looking at different aspects. So for instance, we looked at environmental impacts, sociocultural impacts, like the refugee crisis. We looked at the fact that there's informational challenges in the sense that, our Facebook ads were rejected because apparently it was a political message to talk about a climate change hackathon. So like just thinking about things like that, like there's a problem of like, why is this a political issue when really it should be like a scientific issue that, we can talk about. And so there are some of these looking at solutions on different facets. But what's kind of interesting is behind the like sort of those high level stats are a whole bunch of like really cool stuff that happens behind the scenes. And to this, and I'm so grateful for just the partners we had, in particular Oceanwise, and they were really fun. It's interesting. I think especially as youth, and I'm sure a lot of you folks probably experience this as well. It's sometimes you need someone to believe in you, right? Because the reality is, we're young, a lot of young people, we don't have the resources per se to run an event like this. We don't have the knowledge per se. We need people like mentors to help us along. We need people who have, bigger pockets than us to, help fund certain things. We need help, right? Especially, we're growing leaders. And I really want to credit Oceanwise, Ocean Bridge for believing in me and our team at the hackathon. I want to credit all these other great partners you see for giving us those supports, because this was our first time. This is my first time organizing a hackathon. and a lot of these folks, had that experience before. So it's really real privilege to, get their help. It was kind of cool because, in the event itself, there was everything from, educational sessions where, this is like a session on prototyping. We had all these games and stuff kind of mixed in. So yeah, you're doing these solutions, but also like keeping it fun and, learning a bunch of stuff along the way. We had mentor sessions. I think the person in the middle there is Lily, this incredible mentor, an Ocean Bridge connection as well. We had just all these folks from across the world coming together, and it was just a really, really fun time. And you know what? There's a lot of incredible innovation as well. Of course, we saw like hardware innovations. Like this is a smoke detector for forest fires, which is kind of super cool. The team out of India. This is a team that was actually operating, I think, in 3 countries, but mostly out of Canada. Where they had like another kind of social media campaign. You think of like hashtag Cries for Future, what the impact that had. And here it was about like what's the turning point for youth, who may be feeling anxiety, and is there a turning point to help youth get over that, especially when for so many of us that's a big issue. Looking at food waste as an issue, I think that's something we chatted about earlier in some of the debriefs as well. So this is a kind of an app around the issue of food waste and how we can do that. One of my favorite innovations here is this one, because I think this is Food Forests, and this team I recognize this. It's interesting because oftentimes we talk about innovation as creating new things. What these folks did is they look back at indigenous knowledge and ask the real question about what kind of indigenous knowledge is out there that is not being implemented, but it could actually make a real difference if it was. And they identified that the way a lot of indigenous practices around agriculture and growing food, especially doing it in growing different crops in a common space, can actually, if that was urban gardens in different places, can actually make a real massive impact. There's all this research to show what kind of impact it can have. And just a real credit to that team for recognizing innovation is not just about creating new things, because I don't think there's really any completely new innovation. It's probably more importantly about recognizing what's been done, reflecting on if there's important practices which haven't kind of gotten the awareness that they need, and like really raising up, make sure that it's a mix of doing new things and also recognizing the old. This is actually a team that won, and it doesn't seem as impressive. They had a really nice video, but this is basically like a gamification concept around impacting individual behavior, and they created like this white paper and had a really fantastic video presentation connected with it. And a team of 10-year-olds, like this is a team of 10-year-olds from Florida, so they end up winning and beating us adults, which is kind of funny. But it's interesting because I think throughout the hackathon, I think the one thing that really impressed me most, inspired me most, was I think an ethos of collaboration, and the fact that it was about how do all of us people work together, it's interesting. People didn't really talk about we want to beat this other team because hey, there's some prize. It's about the real prize is the fact that there's a generational crisis, and we need to come together. We need to make some real differences to this thing. How do we come together to solve this big problem? I think one of the things that I'm quite proud of is, even reflecting what's happened after the hackathon. We've got, judges who ended up doing workshops for some of the participants. We've got, we've got one of the teams which didn't even make the finals, like partnering with a local organization in India around their particular concept. We've got another team that's like actively talking with funders right now. We had just a lot of these side projects that are happening. Even for the Oath project, we changed a little bit of like our direction after the hackathon. And right now, there's gonna be announcements soon. Please, I'll share our social media links, but we'll be sharing about how we're doing a podcast that's around highlighting individuals like yourselves who are changing the world one act at a time. And in addition to that, we're also looking at, perhaps, creating a climate action database for the city of Halifax, perhaps later on other places as well, where, we can kind of like just recognize all the great work that's being done and like create these platforms to do that. It's kind of cool. Again, all these side effects have happened, especially when, it's been a spirit of collaboration at the center of it. And so with that, in terms of, if there is anything that I can impart to you folks, look, I don't have, necessarily scientific knowledge or anything like that I'm going to share with you, but it's hopefully is maybe my one big takeaway from this, and hopefully something that you folks can take away from this journey is this proverb. The fact that, and I really believe this, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the idea that in order to make a real impact in this particular crisis, we can't do it alone. We need all of us. Each of us needs to be a part of the solution. We need all of us coming together. I want to give a shout out, Bharat. Thank you so much for like introducing yourself at the beginning. You know, I want to encourage you folks, put your LinkedIns in the chat, right? Like, let's connect with each other. Think about actively, like even at this conference, you know, how are, you know, I might have these projects that I'm working on, and how do I use this particular platform to connect with people on Yova or whatever? And how do I, how do we get people together? And when I need help, how do I, use these platforms to really make that happen? And so, yeah, I think with that, folks, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Big thanks again to Ocean Bridge, Danke, gracias, merci, Dhonabad in my language of Bangladesh. And I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, reflections, and anything else on that note.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the wonderful presentation. Yeah, we are at time right now. If you have any questions for Shutangshu, I guess you can put your email in the chat if you're comfortable. Otherwise, we can, we can wrap up. And it seems to be my video is not working. There's just this like creature here. But anyway, so I wanted to like thank everyone for attending. These sessions have been great. And we have Spanish and French as well. Otherwise, yeah, there's you can learn more about OceanWise at ocean.org, and the community space link will be in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
I just shared you links there. Would love to connect with you folks. Take the oath, folks, and yeah, hope to see you. Hope to connect. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Shutangshu.
Thank you.